I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions, and I thank the witnesses for their testimony. Mr. Maroney, the title of your testimony is Reducing the Government's Holdings Could Generate Substantial Savings, and I agree with that. And thanks to the Trump administration, we're finally seeing some savings, $400 million on leases, according to the administration. Do you think the government's excess properties exist in part because federal agencies and the bureaucrats who run them have no incentive to move or to give up their space? Just why won't these agencies co-locate and downsize?
So there's a number of reasons, but certainly cultural reticence to sharing space is something we've identified in the past. Also, inertia, for lack of a better word. It's a space you've already had, and there isn't as much incentive to move. It costs money to move out of space at times, and agencies haven't always put that up front. There's a number of other reasons possibly too, but certainly those are both valid reasons that they've brought up before. Those are reasons that have been brought up before.
Right, except their actions are different. They certainly were ready to jump out of this building and leased a very expensive building on Pennsylvania Avenue. Recent presidents couldn't overcome that bureaucratic inertia. Yet President Trump and DOGE ended almost 700 leases in just a few months. That's unbelievable. Has any other administration acted so quickly to reduce the federal footprint that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that much needed though. Mr. Maroney, your testimony states that a GAO covert operation last year was successful about half the time in sneaking prohibited items past the guards and into federal buildings. I'm really interested in that. Mm-hmm. What sort of items did you sneak in? What dangers does this vulnerability pose?
Right, so we snuck in 3 different items: a multi-purpose tool with a knife, a baton, like a baton you could use to attack someone with, and pepper spray. All those are prohibited items. All those are things you could cause real harm if you wanted to. And like you said, about half the time we were able to get that through. So that raises concerns. We only did 27 tests and got through in half the time. That suggests other items could be getting through at a greater level.
But you got through half the time in 27 tests.
Correct. And that also comports with FPS's, the Federal Protective Service's own covert testing program.
Wow, that's definitely terrifying. Thank you for that. I have a lot of death threats, and several people have been convicted and served time in prison for planning to murder me. So I always appreciate the efforts on every single aspect of security to make sure that people that work within the federal government and the Capitol and visitors as well are safe. So thank you. Mr. Hart, I appreciate the work your organization has done in making the American people aware how the government spends Americans' hard-earned money, including this chart behind me here. Shows a disgusting amount of federal spending on furniture, which is what you talked about. So how did you go about finding the Biden administration spent about $1 billion per year on furniture while federal buildings sat empty during COVID and federal workers work from home?
Yeah, what we do, Chairman, is we have access to all federal spending through usaspending.gov, and that's a bill that I helped pass back in 2006. So we're able to do keyword searches and look at furniture, look for vendors even, and identify and keyword search things like recliners to identify and understand how much the federal government is spending on furniture. And it's really a scope of government problem issue, as I mentioned in my opening statement, is that when we decide to have a large scope, there is going to be a big cost of furniture. So it's a very useful way to think about and assess whether we ought to have this number of federal buildings.
Yeah, Mr. Hart, we appreciate those efforts. In 2021, the CDC spent almost $250,000 on solar-powered picnic tables. The CDC at the time was telling people to socially distance with masks and basically forcing a vaccine that many Americans didn't want. So what use would its employees have for this new picnic table that has quite the price tag?
Yeah, it's quite expensive, and the social distancing guidelines suggested they shouldn't be seated at that table while they were spending $237,000.
Look at those seats. Look at those seats. That's not social distancing.
No, they're quite close. There's a close proximity of those seats to the other person.
Yeah, real quick, I've just got a short amount of time yet. I'd like to ask, just basically, just for the general audience, is $238,000 spent on solar-powered picnic tables at the CDC appropriate I think the American people thinks that's disgusting. Is $700,000 spent by the SEC for their New York regional office conference room appropriate of taxpayer dollars? I don't think so. What about $6.5 million spent on high-end furniture to redecorate the EPE office? No. And then $284,000 in Herman Miller furniture for FEMA's headquarters conference center, an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars? I would argue not. I'm definitely over time, so thank you, gentlemen.